The smoke still curled lazily from the charred remains of what had once been home, each wisp carrying with it the dreams of a people now silenced forever. Elias Crow knelt among the ashes, his calloused hands trembling as they sifted through the debris where his grandmother's medicine lodge had stood just 3 days before. The wind whispered secrets through the blackened bones of teepee poles, and somewhere in that haunting symphony, he could still hear her voice. Takoja, grandson, remember who you are when the world forgets. But who was he now? The question burned deeper than the wounds across his back, deeper than the bullet graze along his ribs. His father's blue eyes reflected in the surface of a scattered water basin, while his mother's Cherokee cheekbones cast shadows in the dying light. Too white for the reservation, too Indian for the towns. He was a ghost walking between two worlds that no longer existed. The official report would read like so many others: hostile Indian uprising suppressed, threat to civilian population eliminated. But Elias knew the truth. He had been there when the cattle went missing, had seen the tracks leading toward Carson's spread, not away from their village. He had watched his grandfather try to explain in broken English that his people were innocent, had witnessed the dismissive wave of Marshal Wade Garrison's hand as he signed the extermination order with the casual indifference of a man marking off items on a shopping list. Now, beneath a sky the color of dried blood, Elias rose from the ashes of his old life and made a promise that would either damn his soul or set it free. Wade Garrison would answer for what he had done, even if it meant Elias had to ride straight into hell to find him. The trail to Garrison's ranch in Colorado Territory stretched across 300 miles of unforgiving wilderness, through landscapes that seemed carved by God's own fury. Elias rode his paint horse, Naeli, I love you, in his grandmother's tongue, through canyons that bled red in the morning sun and across prairies where the grass whispered songs of longing. Each mile carried him further from who he had been and closer to who he was becoming: judge, jury, and executioner wrapped in buckskin and purpose. His supplies were meager: enough jerky and hardtack for a week, a canteen that sang emptily when shaken, and the weight of his father's Colt .45 against his hip. But necessity had always been his closest companion. As a child caught between worlds, he had learned to survive on scraps of belonging, to make a home in the spaces others couldn't see. On the 4th day, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and regret, he heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in this emptiness between settlements. Crying, not the howl of wind through stone, but the broken sobs of human despair. Elias guided Naeli toward the sound, his hand instinctively checking his pistol's weight. In this country, tears often preceded bullets, and kindness was a luxury that could get you killed faster than stupidity. But something in that crying spoke to the part of him that his grandmother had nurtured, the part that remembered what it meant to be human in a world that had forgotten. He found them in a shallow depression between two ridges, where a stand of cottonwoods offered the illusion of shelter. A woman, perhaps 25, her long black hair matted with dust and dried blood, cradled a girl who couldn't have been more than 8. Both wore the traditional dress of the Lakota, now torn and stained with the story of some recent horror. The woman looked up as his shadow fell across them, and Elias saw his own devastation reflected in her dark eyes. She didn't reach for a weapon, she had none. Didn't cry out in fear, she had moved beyond such luxuries. She simply held the child tighter and waited for whatever fresh cruelty the world had sent her way. How? Elias said softly, using the Lakota greeting his grandmother had taught him. The woman's eyes widened slightly, recognizing something familiar in his voice despite his mixed features. How? She whispered back, her voice like wind through dry leaves. What happened? He asked in English, then repeated the question in what little Lakota he remembered. The story came in fragments, delivered in a mixture of languages and gestures that painted a picture more vivid than any newspaper account. Soldiers had come to their small band 3 days' ride north, claiming they were searching for horse thieves. When the people denied any wrongdoing, the soldiers had decided that dead Indians couldn't steal anything. The woman Ayana, she told him, Eternal Blossom, had escaped with her sister's daughter only by hiding in a root cellar while their family was murdered above them. The child, Winona, firstborn daughter, hadn't spoken since. Eliza felt the familiar fire kindle in his chest, the same rage that had sustained him through 4 days of hard riding. Here was more evidence of the casual brutality that had taken everything he loved, more proof that Wade Garrison's signature meant death for anyone with the wrong color skin in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as he looked at Ayana's exhausted face, at little Winona's empty stare, something else stirred within him, something his grandmother would have called wapta, the harmony that comes from choosing compassion over vengeance. I have water, he said, dismounting and reaching for his canteen. And food, you're safe now. The word tasted strange on his tongue. Safe, as if such a thing existed anymore. They made camp in the shelter of the cottonwoods as the sun disappeared behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and sorrow. Elias had intended to make this stop brief, share his supplies, point them toward the nearest friendly settlement, and continue his pursuit of Garrison. Justice, after all, had been waiting 4 days already. It could wait a few hours more. But as he watched Ayanna coax sips of water past Winona's lips, as he saw the careful way she checked the child for injuries that went deeper than flesh, he found himself remembering things he thought he had buried with his family. His grandmother's hands braiding sweetgrass, his mother singing Cherokee lullabies while she worked, the way his father had taught him to whittle, showing him how to find the shape hiding inside the wood. Love isn't something you fall into, his grandmother had told him once. It's something you rise toward, like smoke seeking sky. Where will you go? He asked Ayanna, as she finally settled beside their small fire. Winona curled against her side like a wounded bird seeking warmth. South, she said, staring into the flames. I have a cousin among the Cherokee in the territory. If she still lives, if she'll have us. It's dangerous. Alone, with a child. Mitakuye Oyasin, Ayanna said quietly. We are all related. The danger is the same whether I face it alone or with others. At least alone I endanger no one but ourselves. Elias understood the phrase, had heard his grandmother use it when she spoke of the responsibility each person carried to all living things, but hearing it from Ayanna's lips, watching her gentle the child's sleep, it took on new meaning. She wasn't just carrying her own grief, she was carrying the future in the form of one small girl who might someday remember what it meant to laugh. I could take you, he heard himself say. I'm heading south, toward Colorado territory. I could see you safely to Cherokee lands before I what? Before I murdered a man in the name of justice, before I became the very thing his grandmother had warned him against. Ayanna studied his face in the firelight, and Elias had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see straight through to his bones, could read the violence he carried like scars across his heart. You seek the man who signed our death warrants, she said. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded, not trusting his voice. And you believe his death will bring them back? Your family? I believe some debts can only be paid in blood. Hokshila, she said, using the Lakota word for boy, though he was clearly a man grown. I have seen what blood debts cost. They grow heavier with each payment until they crush the one who carries them. Then what would you have me do? Let him live while our people lie unavenged? Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, her fingers combing gently through Winona's hair. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every loss she had ever endured. I would have you remember that vengeance is a fire that burns hottest in the one who carries it. And I would have you ask yourself, when the last shot is fired, and the last drop of blood is spilled, will the silence that follows sound like justice, or will it sound like the end of who you used to be? They traveled together for 3 days, and with each mile, Elias felt the certainty of his mission begin to blur like heat shimmer on the horizon. It started small, the way Ayanna would hum old songs under her breath as they rode, filling the vast silence with something that sounded almost like hope, the way she would point out small beauties in the harsh landscape, a hawk riding the thermals with impossible grace, wildflowers blooming in defiance of the drought, the particular shade of gold that touched the grass just before sunset. Most of all, it was the way she worked with infinite patience to coax Winona back from whatever dark country the child's mind had retreated to. She told stories as they made camp each evening, weaving tales of Iktomi the spider trickster, and the adventures of brave children who outsmarted bears and befriended eagles. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Winona began to respond. A nod here, a small smile there, and finally, on the 3rd evening, a giggle that sounded like water over stones. She laughed, Elias said, as if witnessing a miracle. Children are like grass, Ayanna replied, banking their fire for the night. Bend them nearly to breaking and still they'll straighten toward the sun. And adults are like trees. Sometimes the bending breaks us, sometimes it makes us stronger, and sometimes, she looked at him across the dying flames, sometimes it changes our shape entirely, and we have to decide if we can still bear fruit. That night, Elias dreamed of his grandmother. She stood in a field of sunflowers that stretched beyond the horizon, her silver hair caught in a wind that smelled of sage and rain. In the dream, she was young again, maybe 30, with laugh lines just beginning to etch themselves around her eyes. Takoja, she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it. You are walking a hard path. The only path left to me, he replied. There are always 2 paths, grandson. The one that takes you closer to who you were meant to be, and the one that takes you further away. Which one are you walking? He woke before he could answer, but the question followed him through the day like a shadow at noon, impossible to escape, even when he couldn't see it clearly. On the 4th day, they reached the crossroads where his path to Garrison's ranch diverged from the route to Cherokee territory. The decision he had been avoiding could be postponed no longer. They made camp early beside a creek that ran clear and cold from the mountains, filling their water containers and letting the horses drink their fill. Winona had begun speaking again in whispered Lakota, usually to ask Ayanna questions about the birds they saw or the shapes of clouds. Her resilience amazed Elias, but he recognized something familiar in her eyes, the look of someone who had learned too young that the world could end without warning. "Tomorrow we must choose," Ayanna said as they settled around their fire. It was a statement of fact delivered without judgment or pressure. "I know," Elias replied. "Will you still seek him? The man who signed the papers?" Elias stared into the flames, seeing in their dance the faces of everyone he had lost. His grandmother, whose wisdom had shaped him. His mother, whose Cherokee lullabies had been his first music. His father, whose Irish temper had been tempered by years of love for a woman the world said he shouldn't have married. Cousins, aunts, uncles, friends, all reduced to smoke and memory by one man's signature. "He has to answer for what he did," Elias said finally, "and if answering means dying, then he dies." Ayanna nodded slowly. "And what of you? Will you be able to live with the man you become when you pull that trigger?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He had spent so many days focused on reaching Garrison, on making him pay, that he had never asked himself what would be left of Elias Crow when the debt was collected. "I don't know," he admitted. "Wakan Tanka," Ayanna said softly, invoking the Great Spirit. "I will tell you what I see when I look at you, Kola, friend. I see a man whose grandfather gave him Cherokee wisdom, and whose father gave him Irish fire. I see someone strong enough to carry the grief of two peoples, and gentle enough to share his water with strangers. I see a man who could build something new from the ashes of the old if he chose to. And I see a man who let his family die while he was away hunting," Elias said, the words bitter as wormwood, "who survived when better people didn't, who owes a debt he can never repay. The debt isn't to the dead, Hochshila. The dead are beyond the reach of our payment. The debt is to the living, to Winona, to me, to every person who might benefit from the good you could do if you chose love over vengeance." That night, as Winona slept between them with the absolute trust of a child who had found safety again, Elias lay awake staring at the stars. Each point of light seemed to represent a choice, a possible future branching out from this moment like the tributaries of a great river. In one future, he rode alone to Garrison's ranch, kicked down the door, and put a bullet between the marshal's eyes. Justice would be served, his family would be avenged, and Elias Crow would be free to die empty, having given everything to the grave. In another future, he turned south with Ayanna and Winona, helping them reach safety among the Cherokee. He would live with the knowledge that his family's killer drew breath unpunished, but he might also live to see Winona grow into a woman, to hear her laugh without shadows in her eyes, to build something lasting from the ruins of what had been lost. Both paths were forms of justice, both required sacrifice, but only one offered the possibility of redemption. Dawn came gray and cold, mist rising from the creek like the ghosts of unspoken words. Elias woke to find Ayanna already up, braiding sweetgrass while Winona still slept. The familiar ritual brought back a flood of memories. His grandmother had done the same thing every morning, preparing to meet the day with gratitude and purpose. "You've decided," Ayanna said without looking up from her work. "Have I? A man's spirit shows itself in his dreams. Yours has been wrestling all night." She finished the braid and held it out to him, for clarity. Elias took the sweetgrass, inhaling its sacred scent. For a moment he was 8 years old again, sitting at his grandmother's feet while she told him stories of the old days, when the world was wider and the barriers between peoples were rivers that could be crossed rather than walls that could not be climbed. "She would be proud of you," Ayanna said quietly. "My grandmother, she would be ashamed. She taught me that the warrior's greatest victory was making peace where there had been war. Instead, I'm riding toward more killing. Are you?" Ayanna's dark eyes held depths he was only beginning to fathom. "Or are you riding toward the choice that will define who you become?" Before he could answer, Winona stirred, sitting up and rubbing her eyes with small fists. When she saw them, she smiled. Not the careful, frightened expression she had worn for days, but a real smile that transformed her entire face. "8," she said to Elias, using the Lakota word for father. The word hit him like lightning, illuminating everything. This child, who had lost everything, was offering him something more precious than revenge, the chance to be someone worth becoming. Elias looked at Ayanna, who was watching him with an expression of profound understanding. In her eyes, he saw not just his own reflection, but glimpses of the future they could build together, not as man and woman bound by circumstance, but as people choosing to create light in a world determined to snuff it out. "The Cherokee territory," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "How far is it?" 2 weeks hard riding. 3 if we're careful. We'll be careful." Ayanna's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "And Garrison." Elias stood, feeling lighter than he had since the day he found his world in ashes. "Wade Garrison is a problem for the law to solve. I'm not the law. I'm not God. I'm just a man who's been given a second chance to choose who he wants to be. And who is that? He looked at Winona, who was watching him with eyes that held all the trust in the world, and at Ayanna, whose strength had shown him what real courage looked like. A father. Maybe someday, if I'm very lucky, a man worthy of the love you've both already given me. The journey to Cherokee territory took 16 days, and with each mile, Elias felt himself changing, the hard edges of his grief being slowly worn smooth by Ayanna's quiet wisdom and Winona's infectious laughter. They traveled slowly, taking time to teach Winona English and for her to teach them games that Cherokee and Lakota children had played for generations. At night around their campfires, Ayanna would tell stories, and gradually Elias began to add his own tales. His Irish father had brought from the old country, mixed with Cherokee legends his mother had whispered, and Lakota wisdom his grandmother had shared. Their voices wove together like threads in a blanket, creating something new and beautiful from the scraps of their separate pasts. "We are making our own tribe," Ayanna said one evening as they watched Winona chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Is that what we're doing? Mitakuye oyasin. We are all related. Family isn't just blood, it's choice. Every day we choose to care for each other. Every day we choose to stay." Elias nodded, understanding finally flooding through him like rain after drought. This was what his grandmother had meant when she spoke of harmony, what his parents had found when they chose love over the world's disapproval. Not the absence of struggle, but the decision to face that struggle together. On their 15th night, camped in the foothills where they could see Cherokee land spread out below them, Ayanna took his hand as they sat by their fire. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice careful, "about why I was really traveling alone with Winona." Elias waited, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to share. "She isn't my sister's child. She's mine. I told you I was taking her to my cousin, but the truth is, I have no cousin. I have no one left in this world except her." Her grip on his hand tightened. "I lied because I was afraid you would leave us if you knew I had no destination, no plan beyond keeping her alive one more day." The confession hung between them like a held breath. Elias thought of all the lies that had been told to justify the slaughter of innocent people, the ways that deception had been used as a weapon against his family and hers. But this lie had been born of love, not hatred, of desperation, not greed, and its purpose had been to protect the most vulnerable among them. "What's her real name?" he asked. "Winona is real, but she's Winona Little Star, not Winona Lakota Wind. She's my daughter, born when I was 16, father unknown." Ayanna's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I've been running with her for 3 years, ever since the soldiers came to our first camp. Every time we settle somewhere, they find us. Every time we make friends, we have to leave them behind." Elias turned to face her fully, seeing in the firelight the tracks of tears she had been holding back for who knew how long. "You're not running anymore," he said simply. "Elias, you're not running anymore," he repeated, lifting her hands to his lips and kissing her knuckles gently. "None of us are. We're going to find a place to make a home, and we're going to stay. We're going to plant things and watch them grow. We're going to teach Winona to read and write in 3 languages. We're going to get old together, and when people ask us how we survived what we survived, we're going to tell them it was love that saved us." Ayanna began to cry then, but they were tears of relief, of hope, long deferred, finally given permission to bloom. "I love you," she whispered in English, then repeated it in Lakota. "Tekihila." "Gavoyu," Elias replied in Cherokee. "I love you too." They held each other as the fire died down to embers, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, a sound his grandmother had always said meant spirits were passing from one world to the next, leaving blessings in their wake. They built their home in a valley where Cherokee, Creek, and white settlers had learned to live as neighbors, where Winona could grow up speaking all the languages of her heritage, and learning that belonging didn't depend on the purity of her blood, but on the generosity of her heart. Elias never forgot Wade Garrison, but he stopped dreaming of the marshal's death. Instead, he dreamed of Winona's wedding day, of grandchildren who would carry forward the best of all their mixed traditions, of a future where the lines between peoples were bridges instead of barriers. One day, nearly 2 years after they had settled in the valley, a rider brought news that made Elias's hands shake as he read it. Wade Garrison had been arrested by federal marshals for his role in the illegal seizure of native lands and the murder of peaceful tribal members. He would face trial in Denver, with testimony from survivors and evidence of the bribes he had taken from land speculators. Justice, it seemed, had found its own path. "Will you go?" Ayanna asked that evening as they watched Winona help their Cherokee neighbors with the harvest. To testify, Elias considered it, weighing the satisfaction of seeing Garrison face consequences against the risk of opening old wounds. "No," he said finally, "my testimony isn't needed, and my life is here now, with you, with her, with the family we've chosen to become." Ayanna smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud. all of them would be proud. They died so that we could learn to live. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility, Elias Crow felt something he had thought lost forever in the ashes of his childhood. Peace. Not the peace of endings, but the peace of beginnings. The peace of a man who had chosen love over vengeance, and found in that choice, not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. In the distance, Winona's laughter rang out like bells, and Elias knew with absolute certainty that some victories could only be won by refusing to fight the war the world expected you to wage. Years later, when travelers passed through their valley and marveled at the harmony they found there, Cherokee and Creek, Irish and German settlers, mixed-blood families like his own, all living and working together, Elias would tell them the secret. Love isn't something you fall into or out of. It's something you choose, every day in 1,000 small ways. You choose it when you share your water with strangers. You choose it when you help a neighbor with their harvest. You choose it when you teach children that they belong to all the peoples in their blood, not just the one the world thinks it can see. And sometimes, if you're very blessed, love chooses you back. The greatest battles, he learned, were won not with bullets but with open hands. The strongest fortresses were built not of stone but of stories shared across cultural lines. And the most lasting victories came not from defeating your enemies, but from refusing to let them define who you became. In the end, Elias Crow discovered that revenge was a fire that consumed everything it touched, but love was a light that grew brighter with every life it illuminated, transcending all boundaries of blood, faith, and the arbitrary lines that divided maps but need never divide hearts.